Hey guys, Stockaholics, thank you guys for being here today. I wanted to make a short video today talking about shipping long cycles and then kind of how those interact with short-term events or catalysts. A few weeks ago, I made a video talking about shipping super cycles, and this is kind of how I see these long-term shipping cycles. I think that they're really a product of the US monetary system for the time being. And basically, when you see periods of time when you see a large dollar growth in the US economy, it tends to correlate highly with global GDP growth. And then as a result of that high GDP growth, you get high shipping rates generally across the board in all shipping segments. By the way, that's one way that you can generally tell that you are in a shipping super cycle, is if you see high rates across all kinds of shipping segments. Okay, anyway, but I wanted to show how these long-term cycles interact with short-term events. And the way I'm going to be doing that today is by looking at one of my favorite oil tanker companies. And even though this is an oil tanker company, we're going to go through like 20 years of history on a chart with this company. But even though this is an oil tanker company, I believe everything that I'm talking about this company applies to any other shipping segment in terms of long-term cycles and then short-term catalysts. Okay, here we go. Okay, I wanted to look at one of my favorite oil tanker companies. We're going to look at Frontline. Although this is one of my favorites, that's not investment advice. I wanted to look at this company just because it's been around for so long. So you can really see how I think these long-term and short-term cycles interact with each other. And guys, really what drives these share price performance, I'm going to be 100% honest, it's 100% the indexes, how they perform, what drive these share price performances. So we're looking at a company like Frontline. They're in the dirty and clean tanker business. So what's going to drive this share price performance is going to be how the dirty tanker index performs and how the clean tanker index performs. Okay, anybody who says something to the contrary, in my opinion, is either not informed enough on the space or is outright lying to you. Because I've seen some pretty high profile people saying some things to the contrary, especially lately in the container ship space. Containers, although they have been on these, I'm going to quick rant here, although they have been, they have done tremendously over the past few years, and a lot of those have locked up long-term charters. It does not matter because those long-term charters are not going to influence the share price performance. The same thing like in any commodity company. Let's say I'm in the oil business, and the oil price goes from 100 to 50. It doesn't really matter how profitable that business is or what kind of contracts that company has locked up. The share price is going to fall. Okay, it's just what it is. I think it's dumb. I think it's silly. I get it, but it is what it is, right? So just wanted to get that off my chest. Okay, so let's get into this chart. In the 90s, we had a period of smooth global growth. This was largely due to increasing slowly amounts of US dollar, in my opinion, among a bunch of other reasons. I get it, but I think that the US dollar is really a big driver in all of this. In the 2000s, there in the United States, there was that dot-com bubble. And I don't know exactly when the US money creation declined, but there was a period, I'm guessing it's around here, 2001, where bank lending declined a little bit for about a year or so, okay? And then in 2002, 2003, you really saw that bank lending really started ticking up, and this was because the US housing market started entering a period of rapid expansion and eventually entered a bubble phase, right? Now, in my opinion, this high inflation is what caused this long-term shipping cycle. And it was also, you can also see this through all kinds of commodity prices. Actually, I think what may also have driven this big move up here is also a gradual increase in oil price during this time. But at the same time, what really drove the share price to go absolutely parabolic, in my opinion, was a combination of that high inflation taking place, but there was also an external catalyst or a short-term event happening at the same time. And there was the Iraq war invasion, which started, I think, like February, March 2003. So when you combine this high period of structural inflation from the US housing market and the Iraq war, which both of those caused oil price to go up dramatically, and it also caused the oil tanker rates to go straight to the moon, right? Now, in 2008, this long-term U.S. money cycle came to an end. And so you had the global financial crisis when the U.S. housing market crashed. And so you had a short period of deflation, 2008, 2009, I think. And then basically you had really lower rates of inflation compared to this period, or disinflation during that time, right? Now down here, there was a short-term catalyst in 2014, 15, 16. I don't know exactly when this was, when this began and ended, but I know there was an OPEC supply glut. So all of the OPECs basically got into a pricing war. I think the reason they did this is because they were really trying to kill off U.S. shale at the time. They said, frick, we're sick of U.S. shale. So they just flooded. They didn't defend oil price anymore. They flooded the market with oil. And so that was great for tankers because oil tankers were needed to put this oil somewhere. Same kind of thing happened a little bit later, which we'll get into, right? But that lasted for a couple of years over here. But it didn't really help the share price that much because even though this was kind of a short-term positive catalyst or event for oil tankers, you were still in that structural kind of disinflation period. And by the way, I think that this, if you listen to some really smart people out there, they call this period like the silent depression because basically US growth and global growth, it didn't really grow at the same rate as it was the period prior. And you listen to some smart people like Jeff Snyder. He basically goes through things like the bank lending, U.S. money creation. It basically just went off a cliff after 2008. Something broke in the U.S. monetary system. And what I believe it's really just a giant product of demographics. You just ran out of people to give loans to during this time. You kind of had the Gen Xers kind of peaking after that last cycle over there, okay? But anyway, you went down here. You had very low U.S. monetary growth. So it didn't, even though you had a positive catalyst, it didn't really benefit oil tankers tremendously during this time, right? And so you went through the even longer period, decreasing earnings. Oh, and by the way, during this whole time, you also had a massive overhang, massive oversupply of oil tankers coming off from this period, 2008, where they were just massively building tons and tons and tons and tons of ships to try and keep up with demand. You know, that's what shipping companies do. When they make money, they buy ships, and they were making a lot of money, so they bought a lot of ships, way too many. So again, we're very deep into the silent depression over here. U.S. monetary growth very low during this time, but over here, something we can see that the share price started ticking up. I think this is starting because you can finally see around this period, 2018-19, you're finally seeing like a recovery in U.S. Housing market. You're finally starting to see slight signs of U.S. monetary growth. And then over here, we had the Trump Costco sanctions. So you can see, if you look at a lot of oil tanker companies, there was this really sharp move in 2019 until like January of 2020. And this was because Trump basically sanctioned a bunch of a Chinese company, Costco, which has a tremendous amount of oil tankers, and removed a whole lot of supply from the fleet. Now, after this, there was the global medical event. And for oil tankers, they had a period where they earned a great amount of money, but they didn't really get a lot of respect for these earnings because everybody knew, even though that these rates were high during this short period over here, everybody knew that global oil demand was going off a cliff. So it was largely a negative catalyst for oil tankers. But if you look at a segment like the container ships, this was a tremendous catalyst, a positive catalyst for them, because a lot of the inflation that we had during this time from U.S. stimulus went directly into goods spending, and container ships, if you look at any stock, just did tremendous. So although this was a negative catalyst for oil tankers, it was a tremendously positive short-term catalyst for the containers, right? Now the containers, their freight rates have started coming off of these parabolic levels, and as a result, their share prices are down tremendously as well. Many are down as much as like 50%. Again, I think I talked a little bit about that prior. Okay, But during this time, we also had that high inflation, right? And you can look at commodity prices across the board. They were going up tremendously. And this is all a result of US monetary creation. Largely, this was from US stimulus that was monetized, but it was also from tremendous amounts of PPP loans that were taking place through the banking system, right? Now, we're at the tail end of this stimulus, right? Lately, you can see that a lot of commodity prices have been coming off their tremendous highs. And that's because that inflation wore off. It was temporary. So right now we're in a period of disinflation, which means the inflation rate is going down. But in, what was it? I think February this year. February, you had the Russians invade Ukraine. And this is a tremendously positive catalyst for oil tankers. I've mentioned that why in several videos. Essentially, it's putting a wrench in this machine of the oil supply chain, right? So it's causing higher and higher rates for the Russian war. But you can see, in my opinion, we are still in a slight period of disinflation, but I think that that's going to shortly come to an end. Now, I don't know exactly when it's going to come to an end. I don't have a crystal ball, but I can see that there is a lot of bank lending taking place, especially in the US housing market. And I think that there is a structural inflation also on the way because of demographics, where you just have a lot of loan-aged adults getting ready to get a bunch of loans, especially in the US housing market. And these people are none other than the millennials, where we have an expansionary demographic taking place. Now, what makes me so excited about oil tankers is that I can see that this is already coming. We can see it in a lot of the loaning growth rates. The interest rates, in my opinion, are as they go up, are also telling you that there's increased demand for loans. And yes, the Federal Reserve can also have some influence with their MBS purchases and things like that. But if you see higher interest rate, it tells you that there's also increasing demand for loans also. So if you combine the Russian war catalyst and you combine what I think is coming, there is an tremendous, in my opinion, opportunity, not investment advice, in the oil tanker space. Anyway, that's what I wanted to talk about today. Let me know what you guys think, and I'll see you guys soon.